A topic I've been putting a lot of thought into recently is the concept of going all in. And I am going to discuss this topic through the lens of experience and how I'm utilizing it from previous booms and market ebbs and flows. A little bit of backstory. I was collecting and reselling back in the 2020/21 boom. However, I was only a year or two into the hobby at that time, so I was limited in a couple of key ways. Number one, capital. I did not have very much money. I was working as a public educator still at the time, and I didn't have a massive inventory of cards or collection even going into that boom. So the amount of capital that I was able to work with was extremely limited. And that was pretty restrictive in a couple ways that I'll discuss soon. Now, the other thing that I was a little bit lacking in was the department of experience. So I had never experienced a mania in a collectibles market, period, regardless of, whether it is trading cards or comics or anything else, action figures, whatever. I'd never been through that. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect, which goes to say that everything was new and everything was a mystery at the time. Well, fast forward to today, and we're still in a market that I believe firmly to be booming. My sales haven't slowed down on eBay, and I still have a lot of people submitting me cards for pre-grading and stuff like that, so I certainly wouldn't say that this constitutes as a crash. However, there are a couple things that I'm armed with now on the topic of going all in that I didn't have before. Okay, so notably the two that I'll discuss, and I'll kind of go into some side tangents related to this if you want to continue to hear me talk afterwards. But number one is, I say this with great humility, but I have more money now than I did previously in the last boom. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've been persistently reselling and growing my bankroll for like 6 years now. And so it would be kind of crazy if I didn't have more money in that regard. But then also just in terms of my personal life, my wife and I are big savers. And so we've continuously been growing our personal nest egg over time. And so with that comes a little bit more security in our personal financial life, which makes me feel a lot more accepting of the idea of taking risks in this space with the money that I have earned through reselling. So that's something that is significant. And I'll talk to you about how I implement that in a moment as well. But on the second note here, in terms of experience, this boom has shaped out extremely similarly to the 2020/21 timeframe. And it's just been an inversion, right? The interest has just been inverted. So I've talked about this before, so I'll keep it brief. In the original 2020 boom that I was exposed to, it started off with vintage, and then interest transitioned over to modern towards the end. And that was kind of like building up to this penultimate moment that was the 25th anniversary celebrations release. And this time around, it has been the inverse of that, where we started ripping with modern and everything was just printing out the wazoo. And we were hitting new record highs in vintage, but it wasn't really the talk of the town. And now we're kind of transitioning away from modern. We see like a little bit of a slowdown in that area right now, for what that's worth. But vintage and high-end are still pulling astronomical numbers. And it's interesting because on eBay, I'll get messages on some of my higher-end items, and people will be like trying to lowball me in the messages because, the market's slowing down a little bit, so this is all I can pay. But it's like, well, go look at sold prices of high-end stuff. Like, that is not really cooling down whatsoever. And some of these rare promos specifically are actually realizing higher sales prices than ever before, setting new records. And so don't get caught up in the noise too much in that regard is what I'll add to that. But with those two pieces of information in mind, how am I using that in order to put myself in a position where success is the normative outcome? Because really that's what we're trying to do here. It's like whether we're talking about trading cards or anything else broadly in life, I don't want to get too guru-y, but it's like you do the things to put yourself in a position where success is the normal thing that people would expect to happen, right? Like, oh, you're going to the gym 6 days a week and tracking your macros? Well, no wonder you got jacked. Like, you did all the things that make people get jacked, right? Like, it's just kind of to be expected in that regard. And so what I'm doing now is, whether it be through super popular, like mainstream predictable plays or things that I have like niche asymmetric knowledge on, Naruto. Sorry, it's allergy season. All that Canada wildfire fog is really getting to my lungs. But in these types of situations, where formerly I would have seen a good opportunity. I was no fool. Maybe I'm still a fool today, but I was less of a fool back in 2020. I saw these opportunities still. It's kind of hard to ignore these things in collectibles because it's like the coolest stuff usually does the best, right? But due to my anxiousness, due to navigating a new environment, and then also my restricted capital, I would only be able to buy like 1 or 2 copies of the card. And there were some other mistakes that I was making at the time too, where if I saw a good play, I got the card at the right time, but maybe I sent it to the wrong grading company, or maybe I waited too long so I had access to send it at the right tier, what I perceived to be the right tier. And then I lost out on so much potential gain because I waited around for this card for a year. It came down in raw price just for bulk to open up, and then the 10s are selling for way less than they were previously. Like it would have, I have the insight now that sometimes it's worth paying up to get the card graded and back in hand faster. And I know what cards to send to which companies, and that could be based on just like the consumer, demand for the card graded in that specific slab, or the company where it's going to be graded the best based on the condition defects that it does or does not have. And so all of that is information that I'm able to utilize and employ now. Whereas I might have been buying one to 5 copies of a given card, I can buy, 50 copies of most cards or 100 copies of most cards now, even in your high-end range. And I know that that's not like me, that's not whale status by any means, because I know some of the cards that I'm buying like 25 or 50 copies of, I personally know people buying 500 copies of. And so there's still very much levels to this game, and I'm not at the top. But these are things I'm able to implement to a greater extent because I have lived through it and I've made all the mistakes. Like I've fallen and scraped my knee and dusted myself off and changed my course, right? And so it just kind of goes to show, it's like, say an opportunity pops up and you're able to buy a $100 raw card and you see an asymmetric upside, right? Maybe the 10s are selling for $1,000 and somehow the 9s are still selling for like $300 to $500. Obviously that's a no-brainer, so you want to get that graded as quickly as possible. Because, worst case scenario is you get a failed grade, a 9, and you still like double or triple up after grading fees. And so doing that is cool. But if you only do it once, worst case scenario, you get a couple $100. Best case scenario, you get a few $100, like several $100, okay? And that feels really good, and you can talk about your percent gains and how smart you were for this play, but a couple $100, while not insignificant in the real world, it's gonna be difficult to grow in a meaningful way if you're only gaining a couple $100 a month by doing this type of work. And so you can actually increase that exponentially by going all in on that particular item, whatever all in might mean for you, like all in for that card or just all in like you're dumping all your cash into it literally. But again, it's like, say your downside is like you're coming up on $200 in a 9 or $100 in a 9. Well, if you send off 50 of those cards, well, now it's substantial because $5,000 is tremendous. Like that's a big amount of growth, especially for all those failed items. And then, look at the upside magnified out to 50 or 500 or whatever too. It's like volume scales. And so the thing to consider is don't be too trigger shy when you notice these opportunities, particularly if it's an area where you have more knowledge than others in. Or maybe you have, I don't know. Like, I don't want to get too deep into all of that stuff, like, because most people know most things. But, this kind of gets me on a tangent here, sorry. But I think some people watch for this type of stuff. But I was listening to the Next Gen TCG podcast last week. I think they uploaded it again this week at the time of me recording. But last week, Tetra Ninja, who's on that podcast with Gem Mint Pokemon, was going in about like how there's never going to be any like sneaky opportunities ever again in Pokemon because everybody knows everything. Well, in my opinion, and this isn't like to be insulting or dramatic or stirring the pot or whatever, but I just think that was a bad take because it's been the case that people know, almost everything about items. Very seldom is it the case where like one dude in the whole world knows something that nobody else does. We're in the age of information, like the internet and AI, and we have so many tools at our disposal, the social networks that people have established in today's world. It is difficult to not know things when it's like common knowledge, like in the zeitgeist of people's minds or whatever, people's awareness. With that said, though, we still have people who are successful and people who are not successful. So even though people know things, that must imply then that there's some other barrier to entry. So what is it if not knowledge? Because in my opinion, that's not what's keeping people from success. And the best way that I could explain it is there's a huge difference between knowing and doing, okay? Knowing something makes you feel good, and it's like a feather in your cap, and maybe you get to be the know-it-all at the party or whatever and share your piece. But if you're knowing and not doing, it's kind of a waste of time. Like, it's just a flex, it's just for show, it's not a big deal. But if you have this information and act on it, that's when you have the opportunity to succeed or to make some progress on something. And I think that we are still very much in a time where even though many people know things, they are still broadly unwilling to act on it. And that could be because they can't afford it, it's because they don't have the conviction in the item, whatever the case may be, like something else popped up, whatever the case is, people do have a ton of information and knowledge on most things right now. However, we still see that there is a buyer and a seller for all these items. Like, not everybody is just selling. Like, there are people out there consuming. And many people know that, like, you know, if you take a look at some card with a 85% gem rate, it's like, oh, I could probably just buy a raw copy and I have pretty good odds of sending it to PSA and getting a 10. But the convenience factor in a situation like that of like, well, this one's already in the case, I don't have to wait for it to come back to PSA, I don't have to guess on what grade it's going to get because it's already graded. So even though people know this type of thing, it doesn't mean that they're always going to optimize it. So if you're the person who's willing to do the stuff, then it's going to probably work out better for you than if not. Okay, so that's kind of like a side tangent that I'm getting in on, but anyways, to the tune of like going all in, something that I'll say here 10-12 minutes into the video, I swear the last time I looked at my phone it said like 9 minutes and it felt like just 30 seconds ago, so maybe I talked way too much there, sorry. But in addition to Pokemon, I have been branching out a ton into alternate TCGs recently. That type of stuff broadly is ripping right now really hard, and there are a few IPs where I know a lot. And I have been collecting and exploring and looking into this stuff for many years. And so I know what all the rare cards are in that IP, and many other people don't. And there's some interesting strategies that I see being employed, like in one of the IPs that I'm purchasing a lot of. I'm getting a lot of my supply from Mercari Japan, by example. And so what I'm noticing is, when I go in onto Mercari Japan and I buy the, you know, whether I'm buying the floor of a particular item, so I'm buying all the items available under X price, or maybe I'm just going in and clearing out the best copies available of X item. I'm doing both of those things just depending on the card or whatever that I'm going after. But something I'm beginning to notice is once folks are seeing movement in these areas on Mercari Japan, so listings that were available and are no longer, whatever is left over is just getting wiped out completely. So I don't know if it's a person or multiple people doing this, but I've been noticing that specifically occurring in real time for the last 2 weeks now on cards in a non-Pokemon IP. And so that is something pretty fascinating. And so those people are essentially skipping the line in terms of like the knowledge curve. They're trusting that somebody else knows what the heck they're talking about, which is a little bit of a risk for sure. But that's a risk that they're taking because they can see the movement of these items coming on and off the platform. And so when they see the churn, they just go in and buy whatever's left, assuming it must be something good. Or maybe they do a little bit, I don't know, I'm not the person, so whatever. But anyway, that's something that I'm seeing too, which is pretty interesting. And when we get into like major speculative plays, that type of thing would worry me a lot more than Pokemon, by example, because there are millions of people buying Pokemon cards. Some of these other trading card games are popular IPs. Even though they're really cool, there is not that same occult following to them. So we'll see how all of that shakes out, I suppose. But again, it's like, to be candid, in some of these non-Pokemon IPs, I've spent like 15 grand in the last like month and a half, and that sounds really stupid, like to me, even when I'm saying it out loud, but there's been so many instances of me seeing an opportunity, not acting on it, and then me kicking myself in the can later on because it seemed so obvious at the time, but I didn't do it. Like, I have been that guy before. As a matter of fact, I'll make an allusion to another podcast, but Twice Baked Jake and that other dude that he's on with, they were talking about a Jump Festa promo card that has Goku, Luffy, and Naruto all in the same card. Okay, back in like March of this year, I had probably 30 copies of that card in my cart through eBay, Mercari Japan, yada yada. and they were, you know, largely pretty clean copies, and I had like 30, like I mentioned. And they were maybe ranging from $65 to $95 raw. Well, PSA 10s of that card are currently selling for 10 racks, $10,000 for a card that I could have had 30 of at $65 to $95. And so that's the type of situation that I'm exactly describing to you, where I should have just emptied the clip, bought them all, and, you know, who cares? Going from March to July is not a big time horizon whatsoever. But again, it's just one of those things where Pokemon was working at the time. So all the capital that I would have spent towards those cards, I just put back into Pokemon. And obviously that money turned into more money. So who am I to complain? But it didn't turn into 10 racks for a PSA 10 times 30, right? Very different, very, very, very different outcome. But you could go back and say, like, well, observing that Pokemon is working right now and you have repeatable plays that are producing, that was like the safe bet, and you made money on a safe bet, and so that's never necessarily a bad thing. But again, like, Captain Obvious here, Goku, Luffy, Naruto on one card. What are we doing? Like, I look back at a play specifically like that, and it definitely fuels a lot of the decisions that I'm making at the present time. And again, that's talking about 2026 Drew. Like, this is still me with like 7 years of experience in the play, in the environment, and I'm still sometimes slipping like that. And I think everybody's bound to. Like, none of us are infallible at any task that we're doing, any area of knowledge or expertise that we might have. We're still not infallible. It's part of what it is to be human, and that's fine. But again, it's like, I would encourage you that if you do have some asymmetric knowledge, or maybe you have way more capital than somebody in a particular area, those can all be things to move on. And so that's what I'm doing. I'd be interested to hear what you guys are all up to in the comments down below. I appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.